Hello my fellow misfortunates, in this video you will be gaining a quick overview of the 10.16 AD carry metagame, so you can be well prepared for your solo queue climb. I will tell you exactly how every AD carry is played, which includes optimal runes, items and their respective positions on the tier list. And talking about the AD carry metagame, we first and foremost need to address the elephant in the room, Nimbus Cloak. This rune has been over-centralizing the meta ever since January of 2020, and now in patch 10.16, Riot are at least attempting to do something about this problem. They are nerfing its movement speed ever so slightly, but this nerf is by far not enough, and the metagame for marksman will therefore still revolve around Nimbus Cloak, Death Stance and the combination of Manamune and Presence of Mind. The worst AD carry this patch, placed on the very bottom of C tier, is Sivir. Many of the current top tier picks simply destroy her in lane due to her range disadvantage. And for all Sivir mains out there, keep in mind that even Sivir is a viable pick in solo queue if you are very good at that champion. Individual skill is always more important than champion matchups in solo queue, unless you are playing in Master or Challenger. If you manage to survive the early to mid game, Sivir transforms into a decent champion at 3 or more items. She sadly does not really synergize with Manamune, as she relies on landing AoE crits with her W in teamfights. Her inflexible itemization and the fact that she reaches her big power spike when your average game is already over are Sivir's two big weaknesses. Next up we got Rachel. She kind of is in the same boat, sporting short range and being reliant on her 3-item crit power spike. Nevertheless, you can still do nasty chain CC combos with her during the lane phase, or play her with a Rakan support for the early game cheese. Once you do reach the holy trinity of Essence Reaver, Infinity Edge and Rapid Fire Cannon, Rachel can start to shine with her safe and reliable teamfighting. However, the other AD carries will give you a hard time if you pick this champion, so be warned. Kalista is another champion that currently has a hard time to compete. She heavily relies on attack speed and defensive stats to do her thing. You need to stack up your spears to enable rend and also stay alive, which can be difficult as Kalista rather needs to be in the middle of a team fight to do maximum damage. You will only have the gold to actually do this if you get fed in the lane phase. This is certainly a viable strategy since Kalista's early game is extremely strong. However, if your lane opponent knows this and plays carefully, Kalista is rather useless later on. Being an on-hit champion, fitting Manamune into her kit would be the dream. The only problem is that Manamune provides neither attack speed nor lifesteal and puts you in an early game power trough. Therefore, the opportunity cost is simply way too high for Kalista. Varus, once the menace of solo queue, is now completely gutted. Riot took away his base damage and his attack damage scaling in patches 10.12 and 10.14, which means his infamous lethality poke build became unviable. In patch 10.16, you are better off playing him with lethal tempo again, making use of his attack speed scaling and utility during the mid game. I'm also rather confident that there is a lot of untapped potential with Manamune Varus. Most players go with Blade of the Ruined King first item, but going for Manamune first to spam Q and E in lane, and then buying attack speed items for the mid and late game looks very strong on paper. At the top of C tier we got Lucian. Similar to Kalista, Lucian is a real lane bully, but mediocre at best during the late game due to his short range on his auto attacks. Riot are also realizing that this champion needs some help, so they actually buffed him this patch. This damage buff is nice for the early game, but does not fix his problematic late game, which is holding him back in the current meta. He is very commonly played with a full crit build, but some players prefer the Blade of the Ruined King path. Lucian is also one of those champions that could be strong with Manamune, and I firmly believe that more Lucian mains should start experimenting with that item, as Mirror Mana greatly synergizes with Lucian's kit. He is an AD caster that also utilizes on-hit after all. Moving to B tier, you have Twitch AD carry. No matter how far behind you put this champion in lane, Twitch will carry eventually if the game goes long enough. Especially nowadays, this is more true than ever. Twitch players have started to catch on to the Manamune build, which makes his already strong late game even more ridiculous. Twitch's hyper-aggressive itemization enables you to one-shot the entire enemy team in the late game, but also leaves you vulnerable to being assassinated. However, especially in solo queue, people tend to not respect stealth nearly as much as they should, giving you a rather easy time to execute your game plan. Next on the list is the queen of 1v1s herself, Vayne. If this champion had a reliable way of stacking Manamune, she would be even stronger, but simply buying attack speed items has proven to be quite effective nonetheless. She's also one of the champions that reward you the most for one-tricking her due to her steep learning curve and massive outplay potential. Similar to Twitch, if you manage to get out of lane without feeding, your chances of carrying mid and late game teamfights are exceptionally high. Another selling point of this champion is that she has implemented the semi-defensive item of Phantom Dancer into her core build. Not getting one-shot by literally everything seriously improves your quality of life playing AD carry in 2020. Xayah is right next to Vayne on the tier list, as both champions fulfill similar tasks with similar strengths and weaknesses. Xayah players are currently arguing about how she needs to be played, as both the Essence Reaver build and the Manamune build are viable on her. In my opinion, the Essence Reaver build is stronger because it spikes really hard early on in the game, while still having extraordinary power in the late game with very flexible defensive options for itemization. Xayah also rewards players if they are extremely good at the microgame, due to all the ways her sequencing and trading patterns can be optimized. So if you choose to invest a lot of time into that champion, you will be highly rewarded. Also keep in mind that Xayah indirectly got buffed this patch, as she is not using Nimbus Cloak, which got slightly nerfed for her lane opponents. The next spot is reserved for Mr. 200 Years himself. Aphelios got nerfed so much that it has already become a meme at this point, but just like Thresh, he will always be relevant in the meta because his kit is so ridiculously overloaded. Ever since Conqueror got nerfed, Press the Attack is probably the better keystone for him. Aphelios' early game is one of the strongest in the entire game, and if he survives his mid-game power trough in which the other AD carries catch up to him, he can destroy late-game teamfights with his AoE crits and utility. I do have a strange feeling that this champion will receive even more nerfs in the future, so trying to learn him now could be rather frustrating for you. Due to the nature of his kit, however, it would still be time well invested. Tristana jumped to the top of B tier this patch, as she received one of the biggest buffs ever. Last patch, she already shined with her vicious all-in potential in the lane phase, which allowed her to transition into a reliable late game due to long-ranged crits. But now that Tristana's explosive shot gains bonus damage scaling with her critical strike chance, she might become one of the nastiest hyper carries in the game. I cannot even properly communicate to you how massive this change really is. Tristana's numbers might be so ridiculous now that she dominates the bot lane so hard that she needs to get a hotfix. I will keep a close eye on this champion in 10.16, and you should do the same. Jhin is the gatekeeper to A tier this patch due to his solid performance in lane and during the mid game, in combination with great playmaking potential, which is a crucial asset in solo queue. Most games don't even go long enough to punish him for his mediocre late game, which gives him an easy time to convert his early game lead into a victory. Most people just go straight into crit with Jhin, which is a solid choice, but Jhin is also one of those champions with untapped potential when paired with Manamune. The sheer amount of raw stats on this item is everything Jhin could ever need. A few months ago, Infinity Edge stacking was all over the place, and Manamune Jhin is merely a cheaper, more efficient version of that. Also, Mirror Mana's on-hit damage still applies to your auto attacks, to your W, and to your ultimate. Next on the list is Jinx, who is like a safer, more snowbally version of Twitch at the moment. She is also completely killing it with the Manamune build, consistently spamming her 700 range AoE auto attacks in teamfights. Your range in combination with your traps allow you to stay super safe, which matters a lot this season as power creep is all over the place. Your lane phase is somewhat vulnerable with Jinx, but you can still farm from range and pop off during mid-game teamfights with your rockets and your passive. While currently also played as an AP caster mid lane, Kog'Maw is also an A tier AD carry thanks to Saber's Manamune build. He is like a slightly better Jinx, but also slightly harder to play. Manamune and Presence of Mind allow you to spam your ultimate in the early and mid game, while at the same time ensuring that nobody can tank your W-empowered auto attacks after you get the Mirror Mana transformation. Just like Jinx, Kog'Maw enjoys a lot of safety from his long range while still dealing damage that even tanks cannot ignore for long. Next up in A tier is the king of the early game, Draven. The Hail of Blades Manamune build still allows him to hard pressure any opposing bot lane with his all-in potential, while patching up his lackluster late game with Mirror Mana. The Bloodthirster crit build still sees a lot of play, but more and more people are aboarding the Manamune hype train. The Manamune build also is easier to play, as it naturally gets rid of all mana constraints for Draven, which makes it especially strong in lower elo. Senna AD carry is definitely back in business ever since the buffs that came in patch 10.12, and she's definitely a force to be reckoned with in patch 10.16. While being a great Manamune user, she also remains unaffected by the Nimbus Cloak nerf, which makes it very easy for her to navigate the current bot lane environment. Also, ever since Senna mains found out how strong an item Black Cleaver is on this champion, Senna started to perform better and better. Her long range perfectly fits in the current meta as well, and she's definitely not going anywhere soon unless Riot were to hit her with more nerfs. At the top of A tier you can see my girl Miss Fortune. And before you claim that I'm biased, keep in mind that Miss Fortune got an inconspicuous yet highly significant buff to her base AD this patch. Especially newer players often underestimate the importance of base stats, and since attack damage is Miss Fortune's single most important stat, this is a big deal. Moreover, Miss Fortune works extremely well with Manamune, while also having the most diverse itemization out of all AD carries. I'm currently using a Manamune Bloodthirster core when I play on my main account, stacking as much AD as I can, but as long as you get Manamune first, the world is your oyster really. Miss Fortune didn't need the buff at all as she was already doing fine, but we take those I guess. At the bottom of S tier we got the like and the subscribe button, I mean Ashe of course, and being a top tier AD carry last patch, Riot are addressing her by taking away a little bit of her late game power in 10.16, but it's not too big a deal. Ashe is also one of the non-Nimbus Cloak users, which again makes her stronger in comparison due to the Nimbus Cloak nerf. Blade of the Ruined King is a strong core item, but you can also replace it with Manamune if you fancy an even stronger late game. Ashe really is a cut above the rest due to her long range and playmaking potential, while still being a big threat in late game teamfights. She simply does it all and remains a perfect solo queued champion. Ezreal is taking spot number 2 this patch, as he also remains unaffected by the Nimbus Cloak nerf while using Manamune and Death's Dance as efficiently as ever. High damage, high range and exceptional mobility allow Ezreal to effectively do whatever he wants at all stages of the game with very little counterplay. Obviously this champion is more skill shot based than other AD carries, but at the same time being extremely popular. Due to that, his win rate, which can be seen on various stat websites, is highly inflated. Don't be fooled though, Ezreal is a true powerhouse and can easily solo carry games in the hands of a good player. The number 1 spot in S tier, I mean you probably already guessed it through method of elimination, is Caitlyn. While not being a Manamune user, her win rate exploded after she got completely overbuffed last patch for literally no reason at all, which is another testament of how impactful base stat buffs are in this game. Caitlyn's headshots scale directly off of her critical strike chance, which makes her item build a no-brainer really. You abuse everyone in lane with your 650 range headshots, your traps are an insane zoning and chain CC tool, and your E adds even more safety to your zoning playstyle. The other side of the coin, however, is that Caitlyn is very likely to be picked or banned by the enemy team, so I wouldn't rely on her completely. But if you want an easy climb, you should definitely pick her as much as you can in patch 10.16. Please keep in mind that while I consider myself well informed, this is still my personal opinion, and if you disagree with anything that I said, I would love to read your opinion in the comments.